Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views covering the topics we hope are relevant to you. Today we cover the fast-moving situation in Bangladesh and what it means for India. We also reveal a Sikh in the US arrested for simply wearing his Kirpan. California legislators consider more police powers to tackle transnational repression, and we take a look at one of the first US Sikh heroes of the 20th century. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to all of our amazing viewers out there. Thank you for sharing with your friends and family. Keep doing it. Let's get the channel numbers up.
Indeed, and of course James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. Of course, as usual, we'll take a look at lots of your great comments, which as usual have been filling up below the videos and creating some great and interesting debates, which we'll take a look at later on in the show. But to start us off with, James, what have you got as your first news story today?
Well, as the Olympics continue on, there's still silly little fights going on and just people being stupid. In my opinion, the latest one is whether or not a Canadian hammer thrower is Canadian. They want DNA testing because he looks Australian. So it just gets ridiculous, all of these controversies that they stir up. And it takes us back to a time that at one point you couldn't be American if you didn't look what they wanted you to look like. And that, of course, was white. So one of these people that broke that mold was Mr. Bhagat Singh Thind. He was a individual that went from Punjab to the US and very early in life in 1913. Now, he ended up joining into the US military. This was not without a struggle, though, because when he had moved to the Seattle area, the white people actually, with thousands of other Sikhs that lived in that community, the white people literally ran them out of town, and it became known as the riots, and I believe it was the Bellingham riots. And this was just the start of a fight that he had to become American. As I said, he joined the military. He fought in World War I as a very accomplished member of the military. After the war was over, the people who were fighting and joined the military, so the service members, were granted American citizenship, except those who were not white. So he did apply. He was turned down. And again, they turned around and said that it was because he was not white enough. I'm going to read an article here, and you'll notice that the headline at the time was Hindus Too Brunette to Vote Here. Now, at that time, they didn't get the respect to be identified as Sikhs. They called everybody from India Hindus. So that's, when you look at that headline, it is misleading, but again, it shows the times that they were in. So the article goes on to say, not even the high caste Brahmin, though scientists may maintain that his Aryan ancestors came from the same Caucasian stock as our own, can any longer, the Fresno Morning Republican points out, be considered white in this country. The recent decision of the Supreme Court of the United States that Hindus are not free white persons has been hailed for the most part with delight by the California press and that of our western seaboard, which we find has a Hindu problem just as much as a Japanese problem. And the Fresno paper opines that this is surely an instance in which a court has decided on facts and not inferences. And so again, it shows the racism that he faced and the challenges. So as I stated, he did go ahead and apply for the citizenship. He was denied. The second time, he was actually issued the citizenship, but that was against the U.S. policy of the time, and they took it all the way to the Supreme Court, where they rescinded his citizenship and that of thousands of other Sikhs who had been granted on the same conditions. He was not one to give up. He was a warrior, he was a hero, he was a leader, but he was also a scholar, a very smart man. And he decided that when New York changed their laws and said that anyone who was a service member, regardless of color of skin, regardless of origin, regardless of race and anything else, they will be accepted and given their residency and their citizenship. And that's what happened. This, of course, led to a whole new era for Sikhs and others to get U.S. citizenship based on their military service. And of course, in World War II, there were a lot more Sikhs and others that fought on behalf of the U.S. and Britain in those wars. So he was very much a leader. He was very much a fighter to make sure that he represented all Sikh people and just really pushed it through to get that respect and to get those rights. And again, this influenced also the Chinese immigrants who had made it to the U.S. against their act. They had the Chinese Immigration Act that disallowed, for the most part, all Chinese from coming into the U.S. And then when they finally did open it up in the, I believe it was around 1940, 1950s, they were only allowing about 108 to 120 Chinese in. And then that again got repealed. So it just shows that the Sikh impact on American lives, on American culture, is very much intact. This gentleman here went on to not only get degrees at the University of California, he also went on to lecture and to be a professor in various areas of diplomacy, in various areas of literacy and literature. So, I mean, he's a famous writer. He was a famous speaker and just really led the way to where Sikhs now have that respect and that those rights that are afforded to so many other nationalities. So I'm just going to go in later life here. I'll skip to that because we don't want to cover every point here, but I do encourage you to learn about him because he's a very fascinating individual. And the story of his relentless pursuit of the American dream is something that I think is a very much incentive or encouragement for others to do the same. So later in life, in 1935, Thind became a U.S. citizen for the third and final time after Congress granted legal status to all World War I veterans. It was not until 1940 that all people from India became eligible for naturalization. Thind became a writer and lecturer on philosophy and Sikh religion, and he died in 1967, leaving behind his wife, and he had 2 children. So, yeah, I just thought that because we were talking about a lot of different issues coming up through the courts, and something that Mr. Thind also was a leader in is that he was the very first Sikh to be able to wear a turban and maintain his beard within the U.S. military. So again, a trendsetter and a leader that fought for many of the rights that should still be protected today. And we're seeing legal fights through various correction facilities, certain tech companies that are being sued due to their no beard policies and and the turban wearing. So I think that we have to look back. The precedent has been set way back in the early 1900s that it is a part of religious respect and beliefs that we need to just encourage people to be proud of who they are. And that includes the Sikhs to display their beards, to display their turbans. It doesn't matter who you are, you should have that right and that freedom. So I thought it was an interesting story and a very, inspiring individual to focus on the show today, Angus.
Yeah, this is a great story, actually, James. This is lots of things to take away from this. Not least, what a pioneer this gentleman was. The US is known for its pioneering spirit because, of course, it was originally colonised by Europe, who were the pioneers. It took a huge amount of bravery and courage and pioneering spirit to sail to the Americas and cross that vast, wonderful land and essentially build a life from nothing. Now, the white settlers did that, but of course then the Sikhs came from an even further part of the world. They came all the way over from the Punjab to establish their lives in the US. They were the pioneers. And of course, whilst let's call them the white pioneers, were up against the physical challenges of building a life in the US, the Sikhs arrived, and of course they arrived in a country that was predominantly white and predominantly racist. Yeah. Of course, we look through the lens of time, and it's very easy to judge from now, but the prevailing time, it was perfectly normal to be white and racist. That's just the way life was in those days. So the challenges that these young Sikhs faced when they came across to both Europe and the new Americas, the young America, it was, I mean, a huge amount of respect for these young men bringing their families to build a life there. So astonishing story that he succeeded. Now, there's another element here, which is, of course, is the military, and again, this military spirit, this warrior spirit, which is so deeply ingrained in these Sikh genes. It's just built in from centuries of warriors, of courage, and some of the best warriors on this planet that history has known. And of course, it's natural that somebody like this should want to join the military. And I have absolutely no doubt that the US military itself would have been delighted to have welcomed in a Sikh warrior like this into their ranks. And certainly the British military welcomed the Sikh warriors in, as indeed they did the Gurkhas, for exactly the same reason. They recognised what great, fearsome, courageous, brave soldiers that Sikhs make, just naturally, just through their very own culture and heritage. They're essentially brought up to be warriors. They're young men. Singh means lion, effectively. They are the warriors just by breeding. So, and I think this highlights a contrast once again between the military and the government and society. Now, the military, I'm sure, would have welcomed this gentleman in with open arms, but the government, of course, reflected the society at the time, which was essentially racist. This guy is not white, therefore why should we make him a citizen of our country? The irony, of course, being that America is ultimately a land of immigrants. That's the only way it was populated and was created. And this does actually mirror back in the UK, of course, where we had a sort of similar situation. And ironically, even to the modern day, we have a slightly similar situation where the Sikhs have served with such great distinction in the British Army. They were invited and became distinguished members of the British Army since the 19th century and have fought bravely in 2 world wars, as we've talked on many times. But of course, they have been pushing, and in fact, many British soldiers, many British people have been pushing for a dedicated Sikh regiment, as there have been in the past. But the British government will not allow the British Army to have a separate Sikh regiment. The Gurkhas have got their own regiment, but not British Sikhs. Why not? And the argument apparently is it's political. It's, it comes back to politics and all sorts of weird, complex arguments about, well, if you give the Gurkhas their own, if you give the Sikhs their own regiment, then the Muslims will want their own regiment, and then, of course, you create all sorts of problems and divisions, etc., etc. That's an argument that we won't go down today. But it does highlight that certainly this military heritage of the Sikhs is always welcomed into armies throughout the Western world. It's society and the government, of course, there's another challenge. And of course, this gentleman faced those challenges in those days, overcame them over a lifetime of battling. Full marks to this guy, full marks to the young Sikh pioneers of the 20th century. Now, one other element, interesting, which I picked up on that right at the very beginning of the article. It was a news clipping, and this is going off in a slightly different tangent here, but this touches on something that we've talked about a lot. And that article talked about, and this is, I presume, a very old newspaper cutting from the time. And of course, a lot of knowledge gets lost through time. As time passes, we forget a lot of things. A lot of what in those times was knowledge that was common knowledge is quite very quickly forgotten about after a generation or two passes. And the headline, or the first sentence in that newspaper clipping, said along the lines of the following. It said, "High caste Brahmins, scientists maintain that we share Aryan ancestors. We share the same Caucasian stock." Now, this is interesting because, of course, at that time, all Sikhs were just essentially branded. They were blanket labelled as Hindus, which, of course, was deeply wrong.
Yeah.
But in that sentence, it implies at the time it was assumed knowledge that the high caste Brahmins of India shared the same genes, effectively, as Caucasian whites. Now, I often, and this is maybe a bit of a pet project, but I'm trying to understand what is the link between the elites, between India and particularly the UK, because we've noticed, James, we've talked a lot about why the Americas and Canada are quite a lot more willing to stand up against the Indian regime, the Indian establishment, but the British establishment, for some reason, has never been like that. It will not have the courage to stand up and call out India. It always seems to side with the Indian establishment, particularly against the Sikh community. Why is that? And I have always alluded to there is this unknown link between the British establishment and the Indian establishment. I've always assumed it is connected to, of course, colonial times. It is connected, there's no doubt about that. But what is that connection? And here's an interesting hint that maybe that we did see, and we've forgotten this knowledge now, that, in our ignorance, James, this is all part of a learning curve for us, but maybe these high caste Brahmins, maybe there is some genetic link that they are indeed linked to the same Caucasian stock. Now, even if they are or not, scientifically, it may not be the case, but even if for the fact that the perception at that time, and even maybe today, is still that there is this genetic link, should we say, between the Brahmins and the white elite, should we say, of certainly the British establishment. Maybe that explains why there is this deep connection that the British are so unwilling to go up against or break to the cost of the Sikh community, etc. So yeah, an interesting little tangent in that one, James, but overall a fascinating story.
Yeah, I thought it was very appropriate. And as we look at that, touching on the caste system, let's take a look at our second story here today. And this has to do with a US lawmaker who wants to give more training and more powers to the police in order to deal with transnational oppression and everything else going on here. We're going to take a look at this story here. And this is something that was vetoed in part by Governor Newsom last year. And that was dealing with the caste system, but also to recognize training the police to recognize foreign interference and parties that are involved in such. And this has really, of course, been set off by the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar and other attempted assassinations and suspected assassinations that have not yet been confirmed in the UK. So it's something that's going on everywhere. So the non-controversial proposal, as it was seen, to address instances of violence motivated by international politics is hitting a nerve among South Asian communities who believe they could be targeted by the bill. Again, with any bill or anything that has to do with race, with identification and such, it becomes an issue of whether or not it will be abused. And this really was seen after 9/11 when people were just blanket casting everyone as terrorists. Whether you were Sikh, whether you were Hindu, whether you were Muslim, if you looked different than them, it created an uproar and a fear. And that really demonstrated how these situations can be taken out of context or can be misapplied to target the wrong people. Now, just because of those instances that happened on that date were perpetrated by certain communities, such as the Muslims or the extremists and so on and so forth, it does not represent all of one race, all of one religion, all of one belief. And to not only take it from that point, but then to start projecting that fear and that hatred towards a group who had nothing to do with these instances really became an issue. Now, as I said, with the transnational oppression and the violence that's going on against not only the Sikhs, but in religious and houses of worship around the world, the government in California wants to train the police to further understand the Sikh heritage, the culture, the religion, so that they can be better equipped to work with the community to find out what the hell is going on with these agents of India who are perpetrating the society and the communities, and basically incentivizing not only the violence, but also the vandalism, the racism, the hatred, and they're fueling it, whether it is through spray painting of the gurdwaras, whether it is posting all kinds of crap online to try and discredit the Sikh community or to paint them in a bad light. So this would give them more powers to identify the bad actors, the agents of whether it's RAW or other groups acting on behalf of foreign governments. There's something else that I thought that was really interesting, and that is right here. The U.S. ally or not, India and other foreign governments violating our national sovereignty must be held accountable. Now, Baines is a Democrat from Bakersfield, and he said that on the assembly floor. And it is a very clear message that it doesn't matter what our trade agreements are or what the diplomatic process is, they will not stand for any U.S. citizen or California citizen to be harassed or to be assassinated on their soil, just plain and simple. And much like last year's caste legislation, though, it goes on to say, the devil is in the details. The bill lists India alongside Russia, China, and Iran as governments that increasingly rely on transnational repression as their consolidation of control at home pushes dissidents abroad. Now, it is, again, confirming that they know that they have agents in Canada, in the US, in the UK, and other countries around the globe, and they're not alone. The Chinese government, of course, as we've talked about before, has been caught with secret police stations that go after their own expats that live in Canada, and they use violence, threats of violence, and other means to try to return people that they feel are speaking out against their governments to their homeland by threats against family or friends that are still in that country. So again, this will hopefully help with pulling out these people and dealing with it. But again, it's also just a concern that everybody, again, is going to be painted with one brush, and different minority groups are going to be seen as a threat, whereas, of course, this is not the goal of the law, but it could be a byproduct, and that's the concern. So it's just a matter of keeping a balance and trying to bring it in with good educational programs for law enforcement, and that is the goal of this one. It's a little different than the bill that was vetoed by Governor Newsom last year. So the last thing I'm going to point up is right here that it says law enforcement agencies, including the California State Sheriff's Association, support Baines's bill. They're looking for training and guidance on crimes that appear motivated by international events. California, home to more immigrants than any other state, is particularly susceptible. So again, that just really is trying to push the narrative that it is trying to be brought in with the proper procedures and training for law enforcement to go after the individuals that they have concerns with, but not to go after the innocent Sikh community or others. So I just thought that was a very important point to bring up. We've been discussing a lot of the caste representative bills that have been vetoed in California, but this goes a step further in identifying the transnational repression that I think is very important, and that, Angus, both you and I have discussed at length over the last several months especially.
Yes, I think it is very clear that Indian government activists and powerful agents operate throughout the Americas, because every time that any group of senators put forward bills that protect the rights, particularly of the Sikh community, or any community that poses a potential threat to the interests of the Indian government, They have all sorts of methods, both underhand, covert, clandestine methods, financial methods, as we reported on many occasions, just to try and kill these bills. They try and stop this legislation going through. And something as simple as banning the caste system, which we've talked about at great length, and the evils of the caste system, which we do know has insidiously managed to infiltrate a lot of society in the US, and is getting worse. And of course the US society is standing up against it, saying no, we are all treated equal under the Constitution of the United States, that the caste system has no place in the US. And of course, as they try and put legislation in place to enforce it, of course India immediately mobilizes its troops, its agents, to try and kill these bills. Likewise, transnational repression, which has become the scourge of the Sikh community over recent years, not just in America, but of course globally, across the diaspora. But of course, again, any attempt to try and push through powers that give law enforcement greater powers to firstly identify and then tackle transnational repression coming specifically from India. Again, they're trying everything they can. They're exerting all their influence, political, social, whatever it is, against anybody trying to push this sort of beneficial legislation. It's quite insidious. What I do notice, we get this a lot, it's almost taken for granted that China does this. China is almost the gold standard in terms of trying to influence politics in the West to protect its own interests, to oppress its own citizens, its dissidents. This is an accepted norm, and we almost come to accept it and take it for granted that a communist totalitarian state like China does that, particularly against its own citizens. This is India we're talking about, supposedly, as we keep saying, the largest democracy on the planet, and yet here it is mirroring the tactics of the totalitarian regime of China. Is that really India, what you want to be seen as? But here we are, and here they go. Of course, this article references the graffiti against the Hindu temples. Now, again, something we've reported on regularly is that more often than not, there is evidence pointing to the fact that this graffiti, which is blamed on Khalistanis, is blamed on the Sikh community, was actually perpetrated by Hindus themselves. It was a false flag. It was deliberately designed by Hindu activists against their own temple to try and turn everybody against the Sikhs by trying to blame the Sikhs for doing this against the temples, which, as it turns out, is not the case. Certainly in most cases has been proved to be not the case. It was the Hindus themselves who did it. So there are all these tactics going on. They are fighting desperately just to push the Indian Hindutva agenda. And I changed my terminology there from Hindu to Hindutva deliberately, because that article also refers to a section of Hindu society that have recognised this problem. They have recognised what is going on in their own nation of India. So there are all these human rights groups that are operated by Hindus who recognise this move towards totalitarianism. So even amongst the Hindu community, they recognise that Hindutva is this terrible thing that is happening. So not all Hindus are Hindutva. We always make that very clear. And that there are large parts of the Hindu population who are not part of the RSS, who don't agree with the RSS. But notice also, as referenced in this article, that these same groups themselves are blocked in India. So even from outside India, these Hindu rights groups who are trying to point out to their own Hindu brethren, look what's happening, even they are blocked from India. Hindutva are blocking even their own people, even though they say we're all Hindus together and we want a Hindu Rashtra. Actually, it's not. They are the right-wing extremists. They want a right-wing extremist nation, is what they want. That is what it's really all about. That is what the RSS is all about. So, yeah, James, it's a fascinating insight into this insidious creep, this mission creep from India, spreading its tentacles out into the West. It's not good, is it?
No, and it's, it should also be pointed out that in that one article, they referenced the trade barriers and the challenges of the U.S. dealing with China, and that they don't see it as big as a historical challenge with India. So they feel that this will have benefit to the Sikh community, unlike when they've brought in different policies with the Chinese. Of course, there was a lot at risk. in terms of the fight, but they feel that they have a bit more diplomacy and diplomatic advantage with India to work together. So that may be a good thing. It may not be, but we'll have to wait and see how that goes.
Yes, of course, because we in the West see India very differently as we view China. China, we take for granted, we know it's publicly a communist state, it is a totalitarian regime, it is not democratic. That is almost a fact. There's no dispute to that. India, the difference with India is that it claims to be aligned with our values. But it's not, as we keep pointing out, it is not. And this is where, of course, this argument comes in, this dispute here in the West, where we are divided, where for some reason our governments are so reluctant to admit that India is more aligned at the moment to China, the regime of China, than it is to the West. And that is where, of course, this dispute arises. So, with our small voice, we will keep pointing out that India is moving in the wrong direction. Okay, let's move on to larger scale affairs. Let's look at the geopolitics of the subcontinent and that whole region as a whole. And we've talked over the last few days about the big events happening in Bangladesh, and we have touched upon their impact upon India and where it potentially is all leading. Because, of course, what happens in Bangladesh is going to have repercussions across that whole region, and particularly in the northeast of India. Around Assam and Tripura, Manipur that we talk about quite a lot, because of course they in turn, many of those issues are reflected in northwest of India, Punjab and J&K and Haryana, etc. So things have moved forward in Bangladesh over the last few days. It is likely now that Muhammad Yunus is going to be the next potential leader of Bangladesh. Now, Muhammad Yunus, he was charged and convicted under a Bangladeshi court in January this year. And but only yesterday, as Hasina fled the country over the weekend, Hasina was accused of, and again, this reflects in Indian politics in so many ways, and what happened to Rahul Gandhi and others, is that Yunus was imprisoned and convicted, charged and imprisoned by Hasina, by the ruling regime, because essentially he was a political opponent of Hasina. And Hasina took great objection against Yunus and essentially trumped up 100 charges that all went to court to try and politically remove, or should I say criminally remove, her political opponent. But as of yesterday, a Bangladeshi court overturned this conviction, clearly free of the constraints of Hasina's political pressure. And as a result of now, originally, when that original conviction was achieved in January, he was sentenced to 6 months in prison. But at the time, he was bailed, and Yunus then essentially fled the country. But that decision at the time was rubber stamped by the court and was rubber stamped by Sheikh Hasina's government, and it was criticised at the time as being politically motivated. Now, Yunus himself, who is Yunus? Well, he's 84 years old, so he's no spring chicken, he's no young man. But he's also known as the banker to the poorest of the poor. He's actually won a Nobel Prize for his work, a Nobel Peace Prize, back in 2006 for his work helping the poor. And what he used to do was he would loan small sums of money to rural women particularly, allowing them to invest in farm tools or business equipment to grow their own rural businesses, basically to survive. Yeah. But of course, raising his profile back at that time, because he started to become so popular because of his work with particularly the poor in Bangladesh, it earned him the hostility of Hasina. He essentially became a potential threat. How much this does reflect of current events in Punjab. And as a result of that, Hasina and her government just buried him under court case after court case until eventually he was convicted and charged and convicted. So it does look likely that Yunus is going to become the next leader of Bangladesh. So what does a Muhammad Yunus-led government mean? Not just for Bangladesh, but what does it mean for India? And the question is, will he work with India? Will he be more of a hostile neighbour to India? Will he support India the way that Sheikh Hasina did during her 15 years in charge? Well, Yunus was recommended to be the next leader, essentially mainly by Bangladeshi student leaders. And of course, they have been the ones behind a lot of these riots that eventually toppled the Hasina government. And they have chosen Yunus as their chosen leader to take the country forward. And as a result, it is likely that he will take charge. And Yunus has been interviewed since Hasina left the country and has been questioned about, well, where are you going to take Bangladesh? How are you going to treat India? And he said at the time, in fact, yesterday, he said, or a couple of days ago, he said in an interview that the relationship between India and Bangladesh should be, in his words, we should be the best of friends rather than looking at each other with suspicion. Yeah. I explain India's relationship with the people of Bangladesh. Let them, the Bangladeshis, choose their leaders, and you work with the leaders that we choose. And that's how we're connected. Our relationship should be the best of relations, the best of friends, rather than looking at each other with suspicion. So clearly he's setting out his diplomatic language very early on. He's saying, of course, we should be friends. However, there are deep underlying, I would say, thoughts that may not align with that diplomatic language, because not that long ago, when protests were kicking off, and I'm only going back a few weeks, he was actually reported to have said, in fact, to an Indian newspaper, at the time India had been quite critical of the violence going on in Bangladesh. But at the same time, he said, well, Yunus said, when India claimed these riots were it's Bangladesh's internal affairs, in other words, at the time India had just basically washed their hands of it, saying, it's none of our business, we don't care, it's Bangladesh's internal affairs. India were very clearly at the time, and Modi's regime were just not interested to get involved, even to support either side. It was just like, that's your problem, it's nothing to do with us. And what Yunus said at the time was saying, hang on a second, when India says it's our internal affairs, in his words, it hurts me. If there is a fire in a brother's house, how can I say it's an internal affair? Diplomacy has a much richer vocabulary than saying it is their internal affair. So he clearly was quite offended and upset by India's attitude. Now, that upset is no doubt going to flavour his attitude towards India as Bangladesh moves forward. Now, also going forward, as Yunus forms a government for Bangladesh, there is a chance that former Bangladesh Prime Minister Khaleda Zia and her Bangladeshi Nationalist Party, the BNP, could form part of this new government. And this party is primarily believed to be, on its philosophically, anti-India. And of course, during Zia's leadership, this is before the coup in 2007, during Zia's leadership, India had at the time faced cross-border terrorism issues. And this, of course, happened in northeast India, particularly in Assam, Tripura, those sorts of regions. And Assam's Chief Minister, Himanta Biswa Sharma, recently voiced the possibility that Bangladesh could now become a safe ground for more terrorist activities in the future. Of course, this is now reflecting the situation in J&K, and this does raise questions. What will happen now in those border regions of India, particularly Tripura, and of course Manipur and Assam, is that if Bangladesh does indeed start generating terrorist, particularly Islamic terrorist activity, what is that going to impact on northeast India? It does raise some concerns. And Chief Minister Sharma also said that during the time of Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh, all terrorist groups in the northeast were removed from Bangladesh. So Hasina had actually successfully removed any chance of Islamist terrorism spilling out into northeast India at the time. So he did say, for us, it will be a matter of concern. Once again, it will be our concern that Bangladesh must not become a safe haven for such terrorist activity. So we have to secure our borders. And there are reports, and we don't know if this is true, there are reports that Hindus are being selectively targeted now in Bangladesh for what is being reported as atrocities against Hindu minorities in Bangladesh. Those have been denied. Yunus himself is denying these, saying that these are just mischievous reports coming from Hasina's allies.
Right.
Any other points of note? Authorities in Dhaka have assured that an interim government is in the making, which will be headed up by Mohammed Yunus, a chief advisor. Yunus apparently is in Paris at the moment and is likely to return to Bangladesh as of today. So, and Yunus has sent out messages to the youth of Bangladesh: keep things calm, let's not take to the streets, let's get the country moving forward. So, it's again a volatile situation, but it does look like the new government is starting to be moulded into shape. It does look like that Muhammad Yunus is going to be the next leader of Bangladesh. The big question, James, here is, what does it mean for India? What does it mean particularly for those states up in northeast India, the Tripura, the Manipur, the Assam, that whole Western Bengal area? What does it mean for them? Are we going to see a resurgence of Islamic extremism coming out of Bangladesh? And therefore, what does it mean for northeast India? Will it give Modi an excuse then to insert maybe presidential rule like it has done in J&K? That it's going to give him an excuse to take control, as in physical, robust military control of these regions? I don't know. Who knows what the future brings? But it's all unsettled. It's all volatile. Anything could happen from here.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch how the next process plays out, especially when it goes to the next election. And it's also of interest to watch how the internal investigations go on. The military, the chief has said that he's going to be moving forward to open up full investigations into the deaths and the violence there. And some people have gone as far as to say that Hasina has been responsible for over 300 deaths through policy and orders given. So again, we'll have to watch and see how that plays out. But let's hope for the people of Bangladesh that it moves in a positive direction and that they can move towards peace and stability in their economy and their entire country.
Indeed. And we will continue reporting on this. And yeah, some of our audience may say, why are you talking about Bangladesh? Well, it's very simple. It's because regularly we talk about catalytic events spiralling out of control, Bangladesh being a prime example of this. But of course, it does impact India, and it impacts northeast India significantly, what happens on its eastern borders. And as we say, India is not immune to a potential breakup. India is not immune to big geopolitical moves in the whole region. And it doesn't take much for things to move very quickly and for big events to happen. And bordering countries like Bangladesh will have an inevitable impact upon the politics of India, which in turn affect what happens in northwest India, etc., etc. So this is why we will keep a close eye on this and keep reporting about events there. But of course, we do hope things settle down and we get back to an even keel, particularly in northeast India.
Let's hope.
Okay. Let's move on to my second story. And we've talked about educating law enforcement about the Sikh community and particularly the religious particulars and specific requirements of the Sikh community, because of course there are many elements of the Sikh religion that law enforcement and people who are not aware or who understand these elements of the religion need to know and need to be educated about some of the requirements and particularly how easy it is to offend somebody of the Sikh community inadvertently. Yeah. So my next story reports on an incident that happened a few days ago in New York at JFK at the airport. And I'll show you a video now. And what's happening? This is a Sikh New York cab driver who is an Amritdhari Sikh. And I'll come back to that, James. This is something educational for me and you, which I'll talk about in a second. So an Amritdhari Sikh was arrested outside JFK Airport because his Kirpan, his knife, was on display. And it's been called a scene of religious discrimination. Now, this incident occurred on the 2nd of August, only a few days ago, when Rupanjot Singh, he was a young man, he's only 23 years old, as a taxi driver. He was apprehended by New York Port Authority officers whilst waiting for customers at Terminal 4 at the airport. Now, officers were allegedly called by a dispatcher when he spotted Singh's Kirpan hanging on his waist, as it's perfectly normal for Amritdhari Sikhs to have their Kirpan on display. So after calling police, the dispatcher allegedly then claimed Singh was threatening him with a Kirpan, something that, of course, Rupanjot vehemently denies. Yeah. And, of course, Rupanjot is now examining video footage which was taken of the exchange with the dispatcher, because, of course, he denies anything like this. Police asked Singh to remove his kirpan and hand it over to them, which he refused to do, as is per standard practice of Amritdaris, who are mandated never to be without any of the Punj Kakar, that's the 5Ks, that is a necessary part of their religion. Singh also later revealed he was then asked to remove his dastar, his turban, something which of course many Sikhs will deem as completely unnecessary humiliation and of course bigoted. It is a racial or religious discrimination. Yes. So Singh, who's working as a taxi driver, a cab driver, to put himself through college, he said the incident was, in his words, discrimination. And speaking with police in a scene that was partially caught on what has now become a bit of a viral video, Rupanjot Singh emphasised his right to wear the kirpan, for which there is in fact a legal precedent. Specifically, it was a legal case of the People versus Singh in 1987. And I'll come back to this. This is quite an interesting legal case. And this case established a Sikh's right to lawfully carry a kirpan. But despite this, authorities still say Singh faces charges of menacing, harassment and criminal possession of a weapon, saying this was based on a threat of violence and not merely Singh wearing the kirpan. Now, his attorney and Sikh community advocate Japneet Singh has helped coordinate legal support and advice for Rupanjot. And his advocate said that we want a complete dismissal of the charge. And secondly, we need a way to mandate some kind of religious-based training, of diversity-based training for Port Authority, as well as other city and state agencies. Right. And Japneet, the advocate, also said that he was disgusted. We need to fight for our existence, whilst also calling on the Mayor of New York, Eric Adams, and other senior political figures to intervene in the situation. So Rupanjot Singh is due back in court next week as an update on the situation is expected. So let me cover a couple of elements of that just from almost an administrative point of view, just as an educational point of view, even for us, James. Now, it refers to Rupanjot Singh as an Amritdari Sikh, which of course our Sikh audience will of course know what this means. And for James and I benefit, and I only learned this recently, there are two, in simplistic terms, two categories of Sikhs. There are Amritdari Sikhs and Sahajdari Sikhs. The Amritdari Sikhs have gone through what's called the Amrit Sanskar initiation ceremony. They, of course, belong to the Khalsa. And this ceremony initiates them and requires them to follow the Rahit Maryada. That's the Sikh code of conduct, which includes many requirements, but that includes these 5Ks that we refer to. The 5Ks being, of course, the Kesh, which means they must never cut their hair. The Kanga, which, of course, is a wooden comb that they wear in the hair. The Kara, which is a steel bracelet. The Kachera, which is cotton underwear. And, of course, the Kirpan, which we're talking about now, which is this knife. And, of course, as they don't cut their hair, many are, of course, then wear a turban. Right. And they're, of course, required to keep their hair clean. But the Sahajdari Sikhs haven't gone through this Amrit Sanskar initiation ceremony. They still believe in the 10 Gurus and worship the Guru Granth Sahib, but they are not initiated into the Khalsa, but they are still part of the Sangat. So that is an educational part for those of our audience who may not be aware of those two distinctions. And of course, for James and myself, this has been part of a very interesting educational journey for us as well. So, but this gentleman, he was an Amritdari Sikh, and of course he was required as part of his religion to wear the kirpan. It is an essential part of his religion. And I did refer in this story to this legal case which happened back in 1987. This is an interesting case, and this set a very important precedent, which I'm sure will have a huge bearing on this story when Singh does appear in court next week. This case in May 1987 was the People against Singh, and in January 1986, Transit Police Officer Anthony Grimaldi observed that the defendant, Mr. Singh, obviously a Sikh, and an Amritdari Sikh, he observed the defendant in possession of a knife, his kirpan, on the southbound platform of the Main Street subway station in Flushing, Queens County. And as a result, he was taken to court for essentially wearing an offensive weapon. And the judge then presided over, and there were huge arguments either way. And essentially the case was arguing about when does an individual's First Amendment right to freedom of religion yield to the state's duty to protect its citizens. So the simple legal case, the legal argument here was, what is more important? Is somebody carrying essentially a weapon as part of their religion, is that more important than the potential that it could be an offensive weapon, of course, be a danger to society at large? And in the considered judgment of that court, the case was dismissed, and that there would be no further prosecution in the furtherance of justice. Basically, the judge decided and set a very important precedent that Amritdhari Sikhs can wear their kirpan, as long as obviously there is no aggressive action attached to wearing that kirpan. So in other words, if he's just wearing that kirpan as just part of his religious costume, let's call it, then as long as he is not using or threatening to use that kirpan in any aggressive manner, then there can be no criminal intent, no criminal case to argue. So key story here is obviously there needs to be more education amongst law enforcement. Clearly they are not understanding the sensibilities of the Sikh religion, particularly Amritdhari Sikhs, and the kirpan is an essential part of that. And secondly, how interesting that even now there is this legal precedent that dates back to 1987 where Sikhs can wear their kirpan perfectly legally. And this is interesting back in the UK because we have very, very strong anti-weapon laws here. It is immediately illegal to carry any blade over a certain size. I forget specifically what size. And I'm interested in any British Sikhs, particularly Amritdhari Sikhs, in our audience. What is your experience with British law enforcement? If you are required to wear your kirpan, have you ever had any issues with British law enforcement? I'll be fascinated to know here in the UK. What is your experience? Let us know in the comments or send us an email. Let us know. I am genuinely interested to hear what happens here in the UK. But James, an interesting story.
That is very interesting, and I can't remember ever seeing a news story where somebody was actually physically injured or attacked by a kirpan. So, it's a part of the religious beliefs and their traditions, and it's not something that they carry as a threat to any other person. It is just simply a symbolic part of the religion that is very important to be respected. That's, my take on it anyway.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is. I'd be fascinated to hear lots of comments from our audience. Please do let us know in whichever country you're in, particularly in the West, where all Western countries do have very strongly enforced anti-weaponry laws. What are your experiences carrying a kirpan, if there are indeed members of our audience who do carry a kirpan as part of their everyday life? Okay, let us move on, because once again we're running out of time. So let's move on to our comments column. And lots of comments once again. Yes, indeed. So lots of comments have come pouring in. Thank you so much, as always. Our daily thank you to our wonderful audience, our fantastic audience who always let us know their thoughts and opinions. So after one of last week's stories, we talked a lot about the RSS, and we did cover this article about the RSS. And again, we received a lot of comments and opinions about the RSS and its infiltration of the West. Jura Rai said that the RSS, or claims the RSS, took the new name of Zazis. Please let people know. I'm not sure if you were serious about this, and I did Google Zazis, and I can't see any relation, any reference to this. I assume maybe this is a reference to the Nazis, of course. Is it true or not? And you did follow that up by saying Nazi or RSS are the same. Well, as we've referred to, there do seem to be some disturbing similarities. But Harbinder Sandhu did follow with a comment. Founders of the RSS indeed apparently did travel to Italy. And I guess this must have been in the 1930s when Mussolini was in charge, that well-known fascist who took Italy into the Second World War in alliance with Adolf Hitler's fascists, the Nazi Party. And Harbinder claims that the RSS actually travelled to Italy to visit Mussolini's organisation. And in fact, khaki half pants and white shirts became the uniform of the RSS, copied from Mussolini's followers. It's not an Indian outfit. Essentially, it was copied from Mussolini's fascists. What a fascinating comment. I was not aware of that. I will have to go check that out. And finally, Human 19007 says, thanks to the Western world, finally we have support for our fight for human rights and self-determination. Now, I chose this comment to actually say thank you, but I don't believe the Western world is fully aligned with this fight for human rights and self-determination in the West, James. I think, and we talk about this regularly, is that, yeah, there is a lot of us here in the West who recognise what's going on in India, and we recognise, particularly, I would say, the human rights organisations are globally united in condemning the Indian regime for their oppression and their abuse of human rights in India, particularly against our minorities, the minorities in India. But I don't think our governments, and particularly the British government, who I regularly hold up to account, the British government do not seem to be united as part of this fight against oppression in the Western world, James. I don't know if you've got any opinions on that one.
I think that you're looking again at the different sides of a fight, and I don't believe that everybody's all united in one direction.
Yeah, I think the West talks a good game, but in terms of practical results, I mean, Trudeau has been fantastic in his support. Biden, I would say slightly less so, but certainly I would say the American government and a lot of senators, a core of senators that you touched on earlier, James, there have been a core of US senators who have been very vocal and very active in supporting this whole argument and supporting those in the Punjab fighting for their rights. But as I keep pointing to the British government, there is a deep disappointment in the British government, certainly the Conservative government, and now it appears the Labour government. Where is their vocal support? Where is their tangible support? I don't see much tangible support and calling out of the abuse of human rights in India. We're still talking about trade deals, but we don't seem to talk about the human rights. Even David Lammy, our own Foreign Secretary, refused to even recognise the arbitrary detention of Jaggi. So, yeah, you'll have to excuse my cynicism on this. Thank you for the comments, Human.
Yeah, that's why I wrote with the one story we were talking about earlier with Mr. Baines in California. He was very clear that the stopping of transnational repression is definitely a higher priority than trade agreements. So I really like that he had the balls to stand up and just publicly state it on the Senate floor. So.
Yeah, and we don't have enough politicians in Britain doing that, and it's a deep disappointment, and it's to the British shame, frankly, that we haven't got any more senior politicians. We have some Sikh MPs now, but they are a relatively small voice in a large parliament.
Yeah.
Okay, this was an interesting comment that came in just yesterday on one of our older stories, and this is going to, I'm sure, ignite much of our audience. As a Sikh, it pains me to see the Sikh community duped by the Khalistan delusion. In 2024, this Indian diaspora should be focused on the core values, that is faith, family, education and hard work, not pushing Khalistan. This Khalistan delusion will further distract the Sikhs from becoming a highly educated, respected community. If they continue with this path, they will be seen the same as Islamists. Choice is yours. Now, I'm going to try not to comment too much on this because I have no doubt that members of our audience would like to jump in on this, and I invite our audience to comment on this. Do go have a look at this comment and comment accordingly. But I will make a few comments about this, and I totally respect this commenter's right to make this comment. I don't necessarily personally agree with it, but I understand what this person is trying to say. Saying don't get sidetracked by the Khalistan issues. Let's get back to our core values of what our faith is. Now, in my opinion, I believe from my observers, outsiders' view, is that they are not mutually exclusive. Khalistan essentially would be founded on Sikhi principles. Having Khalistan does not mean it's taking the community away from these values. Quite the opposite, is reinforcing these values. It is giving a geographical base, a homeland upon which to found and grow these values. So that is my opinion on this. And then this final comment here: if they continue with this path, they will be seen as Islamists. Now, this is a curious comment. This almost hints of right-wing Hindutva, where they have a real issue with Islamists, and they're always blaming Islam, the Muslim population of India, for most of their problems. And now this is almost hinting that you Sikhs, the Khalistanis, are going to end up like the Islamists. You're marginalising Khalistanis into this Islamist margin of society. The choice is yours. So I think that's a very interesting, a very provocative comment, and I look forward to our audience's response to that. James, I don't know how you feel about that one.
Well, I think that one point that's been overlooked here is, I don't know the Canadian or the UK stats, but I know that in the United States, the average Sikh income is much higher than the average American income overall. So that shows a dedication to work, but also I believe it's about a 20% increase that the Sikhs have in college completions and university degrees over the average American, or the American average as well. So it shows that, it definitely hasn't impacted their dedication to work, their dedication to education. And believe me, when I can go out and meet all of these people in my community, as one of the largest Sikh communities in Canada, believe me, they have not given up on family as a major value either. So.
Yeah, and I think what I find slightly upsetting about this comment is this Khalistan delusion will further distract the Sikhs from becoming a highly educated, respected community. Now, I've had the privilege of being introduced and meeting and become, I like to hope, friends with some Khalistanis who are extraordinarily highly educated and extremely respected members of their community. And I'm not going to name them, but I met some very highly respected members of the Sikh community, particularly in Arizona. And it's been my privilege to meet these people. And I think you cannot say that they are not already highly educated and respected, even though they are Khalistanis. They are Khalistanis, they are proud Khalistanis, and at the same time they are highly respected members of not just their community, but of the Arizona community. And I know for a fact that that is reflected across the whole Khalistani diaspora. So yeah, that's going to be an interesting comment to hear the reaction from that one. But thank you, and thank you for that comment. Thank you for the courage to put that comment there. It's going to be an interesting one. Okay, let's move on because we are again running out of time. Amrik Singh, administrative one. This was, Amrik said that they had no volume, and I did say, if you get in there too early, sometimes the volume does not appear in our videos. And yeah, we were right. So thanks for letting us know that you were too quick, but there's nothing wrong with trying to be the first commenter. So thank you to all our audience who do rush in to be the first commenter. Now, Manjit Kaur, who does regularly just drop in a lovely hi or a good morning to us, and hi, good morning to you, Manjit. But this, interestingly, did provoke quite a weird and quite a strange and quite an entertaining little thread of comments. And one of our resident provocateurs, let's call S. Simba, said, Khalistan must be established in Canada. Canadian PM will approve it. And S. Simba does love provoking our resident defenders, I would say. Now, GB Baines came back and said, India is because of Sikhs. Now imagine, when they have their own country, how long do you think India will last? Unfortunately, not long, if history is correct. And furthermore, war is at India. When war is at India's door, who do you think they'll turn to? They'll turn to the Sikhs, effectively. Great comments saying, actually, the Sikhs make the greatest warriors. And at India's greatest time of need, when it fought for independence, who was at the forefront, who was at the vanguard of India achieving its independence? Sikhs were, because they make the best soldiers. Of course, northeastern Indians, northeast Punjabis, Haryanas, all the people from the original Punjab and the original Sikh Empire, they made the best soldiers, as indeed Winston Churchill recognised at that time. And then Cruella, I just had to put this in because it just made me laugh. Wow, you're a great mind reader if you got all that from just hi. And of course, Cruella, I think, is slightly teasing our resident provocateur S. Simba, saying from Manjit's simple hi, that Simba basically used that as an excuse just to provoke our regular commenters. So thank you for that. Entertaining stuff. Now, again, one of our regulars, Jasleen. Again, a long comment I had to just slim down. There seem to be many similarities between the scenes in Bangladesh with those from Iraq and Sri Lanka. Modi and Hasina have been narcissistic dictators. How very true. Beyond that, the Vishwaguru wants to see the back of her ASAP. No asylum for her. Well, we'll see. India's own precarious position has been exposed by default. So a warning to Mr. Modi. And yeah, this is something that we have talked about, James. Who is next? Could India potentially fall? Now, Cruella comes back saying, well, not sure. And this is maybe a word of sensibility here, is that I've never seen any Hindus protesting. And of course, this is a good point, because of course, India is majority Hindu. It's 79, 80% majority Hindu. And this is why Modi retains his power. This is why Hindutva have managed to keep control of India, because unfortunately for the minorities, Hindus will always dominate. Unless there's some major demographic shift, James, I don't think anything's going to change in India. That once you've got an 80% majority of one religion, it's going to take an awful lot to change anything.
I agree, and attitudes and international recognition as well. So I think that that's something that, as you said, with the absence of anything major changing, it's just the demographics are the way they are. So
yeah, and of course that is always going to be to the disadvantage of the minority communities in India, and that's where democracy is so important, that their rights are recognised, which is obviously not the case. Now, S. Simba could not resist once again to wade in. So S. Simba's contribution, let me ask you one question. Say if all Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, Christians of India convert to Islam, then tell me how long will the Sikhs of India and their Gurdwaras last? And Jocelyn responds in response to that, saying, well, firstly, I mean, what is relevant about that? But okay, I'll play your game. Let me ask, how many Hindu temples would survive in your supposition? This debate is not about who is a bigger dictator, the Mughals or Modi, but for your information, Sikhs existed from the times of Babur to Aurangzeb, just as have existed from the times of Gandhi to Modi, and shall exist beyond. Thank you for your taking the time to comment, etc., etc. So, yeah, I think this takes the argument in a bit of a strange tangent, which it's maybe a rabbit hole, James, that we shouldn't go down. But yeah, I think the argument here that if suddenly all religions in India converted to Islam, except for the Sikhs, what would happen then? Well, I think my answer to that is Sikhs would stand up strong and they would respect that religion. Even if Islam became a little bit more militant about it, I think the Sikhs can hold their own. I think, as history has proved, the Sikhs can stand up on their own 2 feet quite successfully. So, and a couple of last ones for us, James. This is a little indulgence just to finish off, but this was an interesting one. User something or other. James and Angus, you brought a great show for us all. Thank you very much. My kids love your show, and I think James and I had a great laugh about this because we thought, well, how old are your kids? They could be 6 years old or they could be 40 years old. We don't know. But if they're young, fantastic, and welcome to your kids. If they are 40, then welcome all the same. But how nice that you let us know that your kids love the show, and a great hello to your children. And then SSI Singh comments, awesome news. Well, thank you for your comment. Appreciate the hard work. Well, we very much appreciate your comments. And yeah, this was news, very educational tool. Must watch the truth about India. You present all good facts. Enjoy the program, etc., etc. Now, I put this comment up actually really just to make a quick comment at the end on behalf of James and myself, is that we do try to choose stories that are relevant to our audience, as I was saying in the introduction. But it's always very difficult to know and to know what it is that our audience want to hear. Hopefully we're hitting the right notes, but do let us know in the comments or email us what sort of things do you like to hear us talk about. But also about the educational side. It has been a wonderful journey for myself and James presenting this show, because one of the concepts about perspectives was deliberately two white faces talking about Sikh issues. It is a bit strange. Why on earth would two geographically diverse white people, why would we want to talk about Sikh issues? Well, firstly, because actually we've become very passionate about the whole community, and particularly about Khalistan, as obviously we talk about. I personally have become particularly passionate about the Sikh community in the UK and their massive contribution militarily. And it's one of my pet subjects. I do love talking about the Sikh military history and their huge contribution to the British Army, which I am deeply proud about and I love talking about and I love ranting about. But also, it has been an educational journey for me and James, and the reason why we are presenting this show is because it's slightly different. The Sikh community, as actually was mentioned, I think in some of my comments, there are many other shows presented by people within the community itself who are Sikhs, obviously, who talk about Sikh issues. They have the advantage of being in the community. They understand, obviously, all the issues in depth and from a Sikh perspective. But what we bring, we hope, is two ignorant outsiders who are learning about these things. We don't always get things right. But what it does mean is that we provide, hopefully, a bit more of an objective view. We provide a different perspective than to perspectives that you may already see from within your own community. And that in our clumsy way, we hope we bungle through looking at these stories, but we do provide a white man's perspective of it. So it is a slightly different perspective, and we hope it just gives a slightly different view of these issues from, we hope, a bit more of an objective opinion. James, I don't know if you've got any comments on that.
Absolutely. And also, we are firm believers that education helps with compassion, understanding, and peacefulness. And if we can do our part to educate the Western world and the white people or, the non-Sikhs about the religion, about the culture, about the people, I think that creates a much better understanding as a whole community and creates more acceptance and camaraderie between everybody. So in our little part, we're hoping to contribute that way.
I think that's a good point. We are effectively forming a bit of a bridge between the Sikh community and those who are not Sikhs. And we hope that we are, as that interface, we are hopefully educating people who are not Sikhs about the Sikh community, about what they stand for, about their issues, their concerns, etc., etc. So, but anyway, we are massively over time, so we must draw things to a close there. But thank you once again to all of you who comment and contribute so hugely to the show. That is very much appreciated. But we must draw things to an end here. That was Perspectives. Don't forget to keep those comments coming in, and we do love talking about them, as you know. You can, of course, comment directly or email us directly at message@satlegetv.com. Do let us know anything that you would like us to know or be aware of. But in the meantime, you have been watching Perspectives. It is goodbye from me, and it is goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.